What's up, Packer fans? Welcome back to the Pack A Day podcast and happy Friday. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at AndyHermanNFL. Appreciate you joining me today. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you have not already. Always appreciate that. Before we jump into our main topic, I do want to go over a couple news and notes really quick. The first of which is the Packers signing two of their remaining unsigned draft picks, and that's Romeo Doubs and Zach Tom. Both are officially in the fold and now signed for this upcoming season and beyond. That leaves Christian Watson as the lone remaining unsigned draft pick. Nothing to be concerned about. These are all relatively routine at this point, so Watson should get done relatively quickly, but he is now the only draft pick remaining that they have yet to sign, so that will likely be done in the very near future. In addition, the Falcons actually had an injury, which isn't exactly Packers related. I know that the Packers aren't exactly expected to compete with the Falcons this year when it comes to the upper echelon of teams in the NFC, but Falcons lose Deion Jones to a season-ending shoulder injury, which is devastating for the Falcons and is one of their key players. And anytime a key player in the NFC is injured, it's worth noting, or any key player in the NFL. But more importantly, it should just be a stark reminder that while Green Bay is, yes, just going through OTAs and mini camps, these injuries can still happen at any given time. So anytime the Green Bay Packers are donning the green and gold, whether it be in mini camps, OTAs, training camps, preseason, regular season, playoffs, Super Bowl, etc., these injuries can and will happen. So be thankful that, knock on wood, at least so far, Green Bay has avoided injuries, at least early going in rookie mini camps and OTAs. The other thing that I wanted to get to today were the new roster rules. So there were a lot of questions how the roster rules would work for calling up players from the practice squad sizes, returning from IR. Remember, the rules that governed the last two seasons were put in place for COVID and were put in place to be able to cover teams in case they needed to call players up from the practice squad because players were going on the COVID IR list, or to be able to bring players back from IR in case there were a lot of players that were on the COVID list or couldn't play, etc. It was set up during that time frame for those reasons. And there was real question as to whether or not some of those rules would remain intact now that we're not speaking from real relative experience. We are not through COVID, but it's not exactly the same pandemic that we were in 2 years ago. And I think everyone basically expects this season to not have any issues COVID related, knock on wood. But all of those questions remained as to how those roster rules would remain intact, or if they would in fact remain intact. So we got those answers on Wednesday, and we'll go over those now really quickly. So the first one is players returning from IR. So when a player was on IR before, at least these past couple seasons, teams could bring them back from injured reserve as many times as they wanted, or at least an unlimited amount of players could get brought back from IR, and you could do it after they had missed 3 weeks. So a couple tweaks to this. The first is that players must be out at least 4 weeks in order to be brought back from IR. However, they can still be brought back. However, it is no longer unlimited. You can't just unlimited bring back players from IR. You are limited to 8 times that you can bring a player back from IR. However, you can now bring a player back from IR more than once. So before, if you placed a player on IR, brought them back, and then put them on IR again, they were done for the entire season. Now, you could place them on IR, bring them back, that counts as one of your 8, put them on IR again, bring them back again, now that's 2 of your 8. So even though it's the same player, if you bring them back more than once, that counts as 2 of your 8 total IR returns that you can use over the course of a season. So again, just to recap the IR rules, must miss 4 games instead of 3, can bring up to 8 players or use it 8 times, and a player can now be brought back more than once. Overall, like these changes, I think going from 3 games to 4 is fine. Ultimately, I would probably have just kept it at 3, and ultimately I probably would have just kept it at unlimited, but I don't mind either of those changes, and I really like that players can now get brought back twice from IR if needed. The season's getting longer, so if you have that capability, why not use it? As far as practice squad goes, Teams can now have up to 16 players on the practice squad, which is a carryover of what it was. So it was 16 players. It remains at 16 players, and 6 players can still have unlimited practice squad eligibility, which means they can have played as many seasons or accrued as many seasons as they have liked or have played, etc., and they can still be placed on the practice squad. Up to 6 of those spots can have unlimited eligibility. The rest must meet the original practice squad eligibility guidelines. In addition, a player can still be elevated off the practice squad, and they can now be elevated off the practice squad 3 times instead of 2. So over the last 2 seasons, a player could have been elevated to the practice squad 2 times. Once they were twice, they needed to be added to the active roster in order to be eligible for game day. Now they can be elevated 3 times. If you want to do it past that, you must still put them on the active 53-man roster in order to play them. In addition, we did also get confirmation on how cutdowns will work this year. There will be an initial cutdown from 90 to 85 after the first preseason game, from 85 to 80 after the second preseason game, and of course going from 80 to 53 after the third and final preseason game. So those will be the 3 cutdown periods once again this season. And that brings us to our main topic for today, and that is 5 players that I'm going to be keeping an extra eye on this offseason when it comes to mini camps, OTAs, training camp, etc. Now, a couple caveats here. A, this does not include any rookies because I will be watching all of the rookies, whether drafted or undrafted. I'm always super excited to see what the rookies are bringing to the table, so I will always be watching them. Number 2, these are more slightly under the radar players. So yes, like a Sammy Watkins could be on here, right? Because he's going to be a really interesting player to watch and what he can bring to Green Bay. Jerron Reed, any of the free agents, etc. Like those will be big time players that people want to see what they can bring to the table. But these are a little bit more under the radar than that. And just players that ultimately I'm really excited to see if they step up to what I think are some real opportunities for all 5 of these players. Before I get to the 5 honorable mentions that I'll be keeping sort of a semi-close eye on, Rico Gafford as he makes that transition back to cornerback with his incredible speed. Of course, Innis Gaines and KB Anento, always and forever. We'll always be keeping an eye on those 2 as long as they're on the team. Malik Taylor and Amari Rodgers. Those are my honorable mentions that I will also be keeping an eye on. But here are the 5 players in no real particular order that I'm going to be keeping an extra eye on, sort of under the radar as this offseason continues. The first player isn't really under the radar. Usually, this type of player is the player that I am screaming from the mountaintops that this is like my guy and my player and double keep an eye on him. And like that was what Robert Tonyan was when he first came to the league. Like I saw him and I immediately was like, he piqued my interest. Raven Green was that guy as an undrafted free agent. Tim Boyle, of course, was that guy who has now been a backup quarterback in this league for multiple seasons, who didn't look like he had any chance to make the team originally. Like I've had these guys that I've screamed from the mountaintops of like, hey, keep an eye on this guy. This guy would have been that guy for me. I've been excited about him since I saw his very first snap on tape this past season. However, I don't need to scream it from the mountaintops because seemingly every Packers coach and GM has had this player's name on the tip of their tongue through the entirety of the offseason, and that is tight end Tyler Davis. I've never quite seen a player get some of the publicity out of nowhere that Tyler Davis had. Like I said, usually it's me screaming, hey, watch Tyler Davis. He's going to be the guy. He's my underrated player. I can't even claim him as my underrated player this year because Goots mentioned him. LaFleur's mentioned him. Like LaFleur's mentioned how excited Rich Pistachio is for him. Like, okay, like, is he going to be playing safety too? Like, what else is Tyler Davis going to do? And the hype is probably a little bit already out of control. And I'm a little bit ticked off by that because I want to be the guy that's making the hype out of control and I haven't been able to be. So I'm frustrated in that regards. But I am legitimately excited about Tyler Davis. In fact, I had a tweet from after like one of his very first games that like, hey, there might be something here. And I actually did a episode right here on YouTube on Tyler Davis in December that said like, hey, Brian Gutekunst may have found a diamond in the rough in Tyler Davis. So I have definitely noticed it while I was watching tape, and clearly the Packers GM and coaches have as well. And there's a lot of reason for it. The effort and the hustle and the intensity is there from the very first play. I've mentioned this in the past, but on his very first play from scrimmage, you see him sprint across the field to try to make a block like 20 yards downfield on the entire opposite side of the field. You just don't see those things very often. He's sprinting to try to make a block down the field in case the run would have sprung that deep down the field. Like, just hustle and intensity, right? He's a 7.89 RAS guy, so a 78th percentile athlete at tight end. He played 251 special team snaps a season ago. He quietly played 132 snaps on offense. He's still only 25 years old, and he, for me, graded as a plus .05 player, which is basically a neutral level player, which may not seem like much, may not sound like much, but for a player who got picked up midseason, who is still incredibly new to the tight end position, and who is this relatively unknown, to grade even in the neutral or as a very slight positive and over 100 snaps in that sort of environment is very, very difficult. And it was noteworthy that he did. He had a really gorgeous catch up the seam. I think it was against the Ravens that he had that. Had some really good blocking on tape, has a lot of energy, has the size, has the speed, has good hands, seemingly has a very good football IQ. As mentioned, he played over 251 snaps on special teams. Rich Pistachio is excited about him. Matt LaFleur is excited about him. I'm excited about him. Now, what that means for Tyler Davis and just what his ceiling and floor is remains to be seen. Whether this means that he's, I don't know, a nice number 3 or 4 tight end or legitimately has starting potential, it remains to be seen. However, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Tyler Davis is tight end 1 week 1. We know that Marcedes Lewis is sort of like ultimate tight end 2. He's not moving anywhere off that line. He's not moving down. He's not moving up. He's going to be the blocking tight end, right? That's Marcedes Lewis's job. But Robert Tonyan probably not back and ready to play week 1. Josiah DeGuara probably more on that H-back / fullback role with some tight end snaps here and there. Daphne, if he makes the team, is in that more H-back sort of role. The next real tight end that can provide maybe a little bit of receiving chops and provide some blocking as well is Tyler Davis. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that he's tight end 1 going into the season. And I think there's also a real possibility that he is one of the true special teams, core guys on this team. And that's not nothing. So if you're talking about a player who came out of nowhere a season ago, who is now expected to be potentially a core special teams player and could be tight end 1 going into the regular season, that's noteworthy. And that is very clearly why I'm going to be keeping an extra eye on Tyler Davis this offseason, because there is a real opportunity for him. And I'm really excited to see if he grabs it by the horns, because again, he could be tight end 1 going into week 1 of the season. I don't think that's hyperbole. That's where we're at right now, A, with the tight end position, and B, with Tyler Davis. So I'm disappointed that I can't be the one driving the hype train, but I can certainly try to still lead from the front and hype up Tyler Davis as much as I possibly can. Number 2 on my list isn't in that same sort of realm, but Jake Hansen really caught my eye a season ago. He caught my eye as a rookie for a different reason. Remember, he was cut as a rookie. He came into training camp, and I was like, that looks like a freshman trying to make a varsity team. He just looked smaller. He looked shorter. He didn't look strong enough. He just didn't look the part when he originally came to Green Bay. Remember, he's released his rookie season. Other teams easily could have claimed him. They didn't. He ends up on the practice squad, eventually ends up back on the roster in the offseason. And he comes to training camp last year and very noticeably didn't look like a freshman trying to play varsity football. He looked the part. He looked like he was ready to play NFL football. And he made the 53 out of camp. He played in a total of 6 snaps on offense, but had a plus .2 grade in those 6 snaps. And again, just showed that he was right. He wasn't overmatched. I thought he looked pretty good in preseason. And I was impressed that Jake Hansen made such a significant jump from completely not looking the part to really looking the part in year 2. And if he can make another sort of jump like that from year 2 to year 3, at minimum, I think there's a real Lucas Patrick type role for Jake Hansen. Like, I think he can be the interior swing guy that is your backup at center and guard on game days. And I don't think it's completely out of the possibility that Hansen could get into the right guard conversation, depending on how Royce Newman and Zach Tom and Sean Ryan and those players play, and depending on which of those players need to play. Maybe Sean Ryan ends up at right tackle, right? So maybe if Ryan's right tackle, now all of a sudden you could be looking at Hansen and Newman probably as the top two as the potential starters at right guard. And while I would expect that to go to Newman, Hansen very much could be in that conversation as well. So he is still only 25 years old, and I'm really intrigued to see what he can do in his third season. Next up is a player I talked a decent amount about yesterday, and as mentioned, there was some hype about over on Packers.com, so make sure to check out that as well. But TJ Slaton is a player that it would be number one on this list if I actually put it in order. I didn't, but Larry Mccarron definitely was hype over TJ Slaton this offseason as well, saying he's really putting in the work and really honing his craft. Still only 24 years old, played 266 snaps on defense a season ago, had 2 sacks, was a 79th percentile athlete coming out of college, massive human being, 330 plus pounds. In 266 snaps as a rookie 5th round pick, I had a plus 0.25 grade on him a season ago, which is not insignificant. Again, if you are playing neutral level football, when you're playing over 200 snaps and you're a rookie 5th round pick, you're doing something right. And listen, if you can play like even neutral level football, if he can continue to do that, let's say he goes from 260 snaps to 500 snaps or 600 snaps, but plays plus 0.25 football, that is a step in the right direction, because the more snaps you play, the more likely that it is you make more mistakes. That means he overcame those mistakes or just didn't make enough to have it matter. If he can take a step and play more snaps, and especially if he can make an impact with them, again, that makes Kenny Clark's job more easier. It takes hit pressure off of him, and it just makes that defensive line rotation much, much better. There is a real exciting ceiling for TJ Slaton, and I'm really, really excited to see, especially after what Larry McCarron's been saying, I'm really excited to see what he can do, hopefully in the second year jump with the year of TJ Slaton to come. Next up is Keishan Nixon, cornerback signed from the Raiders. He has been in the league 3 years already, but he is still only 25 years old. He turns 25 in June. Was only a 40th percentile athlete coming out of college, but had a 4.42 40. So when you're an undrafted guy coming out of college, you want something you can hang your hat on. He has 4.4 40 speed, came out of the SEC. And remember, he has 3 years now in the NFL, over 200 plus total snaps at corner. And he played 2 games last year, primarily in the slot, which is where he's likely to be in Green Bay. His first game, and he had 66 total snaps in those 2 games. His first game, he had a grade of 81.6 from Pro Football Focus. In his second game, he had a grade of 72.7. Those are well above average grades. So maybe, just maybe, he found something in the slot, and maybe Green Bay saw that and said, hey, we think we can make something of him there. Rich Pistachio plays a part in this as well. He was the head coach for the second half of the season for the Raiders, saw him play in the slot, knows him as a special teams player. So this is somebody that is expected to be a core special teamer for Green Bay, but could really make his living in the slot. And there's a real position available there, because I don't think Green Bay wants to play Jair in the slot on early downs. And I don't think they want to play Douglas or Stokes there either, because neither of them are really true slot guys. So I think there's a early down slot job to be had. And if Nixon can win that, there are some real snaps out there. So a player, again, who's coming from the SEC, 4.4 40 speed, has 200 plus snaps at defensive back logged already, showed some real promise in a couple games in the slot a season ago, familiar with Rich Bisaccia, should be a special teams guy. I am interested in Keishan Nixon and what he has the capability of bringing to the table. If nothing else, can he maybe be the next Jarrett Bush, where he can be an emergency corner while he's also being a really good special teams player? That would be a really good signing if that were the case. So I'm intrigued by Nixon as well. And last but not least is Vernon Scott. Vernon Scott, rookie a couple years ago, didn't really do much, played a handful of snaps, had a negative 0.25 grade for me, but he's still only 24 years old. But why Scott is so interesting to me is, in a season where Green Bay was all in, they redshirted Vernon Scott and gifted him a 53-man roster spot so that he didn't get claimed or signed anywhere else, despite having zero interest in playing him whatsoever. He had 0 snaps at safety. He had 0 snaps as a safety linebacker hybrid. He had 0 snaps on special teams. They bring up Sean Davis. They sign him out of nowhere. Guess who gets on the active roster before Vernon Scott? Sean Davis. Henry Black, who Green Bay had zero interest in re-signing this offseason, he plays a ton of snaps a season ago over Vernon Scott, who is still on the roster. What that tells me is Green Bay had a legit plan, or like sees at least legit potential in Vernon Scott, but he wasn't ready to recognize it yet a season ago. Well, Vernon Scott, Green Bay, in the meantime, you were like the bigger safety, right? At 6'2", 202. Well, I hate to tell you, Green Bay drafted a much bigger safety at 6'3", 230 in Tariq Carpenter. Your job is on notice. The good news is that there is a safety position available. There is a hybrid safety linebacker position available. There are a million jobs open on special teams. The world is your oyster. You can earn your job and earn that 53-man roster spot that you were gifted a season ago, despite not playing a single down, right? So there's still a lot of potential there, and I'm really excited to see how Vernon Scott rises to that challenge, knowing that Green Bay had a lot of interest in keeping him around and not subjecting him to waivers a season ago, but also knowing that Green Bay has now potentially drafted his replacement, and his job is definitely in jeopardy if he doesn't perform this season. That is going to do it for me today. To recap my 5 guys: Tyler Davis, Jake Hansen, TJ Slayton, Keishan Nixon, and Vernon Scott. Honorable mentions to Rico Gafford, Innis Gaines, KB Nento, Malik Taylor, and Amari Rogers. Appreciate you joining me. I'll be right back here tomorrow. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.